Yo, what up? It's Donut, and you tuning into Illuminati News. And we are here with a round table with Courtenay Turner, Mathew Crawford, and the great Matt Ehret. All here. That's going to be absolutely incredible. 100% proof of ritual, occult intel roundtable. Now, Matt, tell us what we're about to get into tonight.
Well, I don't know what we're going to get into, but that's the fun of creativity, right? We're going to lean into the unknown, but we have a little bit of, I think, with a reasonable confidence to know that something good is going to emerge. Maybe several good things will emerge when minds that are potent are putting and sharing their thoughts. And that's really that was all I had in my mind when I proposed this. And Courtney and I were chatting. She just gave a great class for the Rising Tide Foundation on Sunday. And it was fantastic. It was basically going through, in a summary form, her research recently composed in the form of the exactly what you're showing right there, the Phoenix Conspiracy essay, which compiles some fantastic research that really impressed me. And that ties together a bunch of things that are often treated as separate things, whether it's the revival or rebranding of the same crusader movement that gave rise to the neocon perversion of the Republican Party, and the entire sort of, 9/11, Greater Israel, neo-Trotskyist perversion that gave rise to the Forever Wars, 9/11, the whole gamut, and how that thing is being rebranded and converging with the seemingly opposing, but actually very, very similar transhumanist network that's been baking and bubbling and broiling in the cauldron of Silicon Valley, which itself has all sorts of strange occult proclivities. So Courtney just did a great job weaving all this stuff together. You were there for that, Donut, and I know your work. I jump on your channel a lot, and I just love the patterns, the little insights and threads that you bring to the surface to pull on. So I'm sure that you're gonna have tons of fun stuff to contribute. And Matthew's potent mind is always on the frontier of all kinds of research, and all of us are looking. And I'll stop right now, but all of us are looking at the causal ideas shaping world history, and have a pretty good feel for at least the toxic ideas that tend to screw things up for humankind. So since there's no shortage of that going around right now, and Israel's launching wars with everybody around it, with certain ideologies thinking that a greater Israel agenda is sort of in being prophesied, and that it's human beings' duty to bring about some form of ancient prophecy that's somehow tied to Solomon's temple. It's somehow involving an occult, mass sacrifice. And there's games within games. Figured, this would be just a fun thing to play around with. So I don't know how we want to do it, but maybe I guess probably Courtney, since we're talking about you and your presentation kind of inspired me to propose this conversation. Maybe you'd like to go through some of your work a bit first.
Sure. Well, and I'm still curious to hear your questions, because unfortunately we had that storm. It was like a calamity of different things. I woke up with a fever that day, so it was very interesting. I was very kind of delirious, and I had planned to really prepare, but then I got sick, and then I was like, okay, we're just gonna go off the cuff here and ramble for a long time. So I still want to hear your questions, but this I'm really it took me a long time to put this together. I hadn't been doing this kind of research for quite some time, and I've been talking about how these different seemingly disparate movements were coalescing, but I didn't think to put it in the written form and actually present it this way. And then I was I really should do that. So I didn't expect it to be received the way that it was, because when I had done it in oral form, some people were kind of okay, I can kind of see it, but I did get kind of pushback, I think almost like I was trying to force something. But so many people really took to, which was very surprising. But I'm also really encouraged by it, because I think that we are in a very imminent point. This looming technocracy, I don't think is just a vision anymore. With what I'm seeing converge, I think we're at the time is urgent, actually. So I'm really glad that people have really paid attention and kind of looked at this oh my goodness. But so I think all of you are familiar, but just for the audience to know, I've been studying these three kind of movements that seem again, very separate. And I felt like there was a Hegelian dialectic in the works, and whether or not intentionally or whether or not, they just never let a crisis go to waste, kind of a thing. They'll seize any opportunity to churn the dialectic if they can. So what I'm seeing is that there's this Dark Enlightenment movement, and a lot of people are much more familiar with Dark Enlightenment now because so many of these figures are surrounding the Trump administration, have a huge influence on the Trump administration. And I bring this up all the time because I thought it was just hilarious. It was a few weeks ago on CNN. There was this little clip. It was pretty short, but they were talking about, there's this guy, he's a blogger. His name is Curtis Yarvin. I think he's been blogging for over a decade. I'm like, almost two. Who's counting? Apparently not you, And they're like, but it's very concerning because he has a lot of influence on the Trump administration, which I agree. I don't usually agree with too many things CNN says, but there we have it. We agree on something. And I thought it was kind of funny, but it's true. Curtis Yarvin's been blogging since 2007. Right, we're in 2025, so this is almost 2 decades, and his ideas are pretty horrendous. they're kind of scary, and he's a pretty strange kind of character. And then we've got this. So the Dark Enlightenment is this neo-reactionary movement, right? Sometimes they call it NRX, neo-reactionary. And we've got the extension of that was this Nick Land character, who is, if Kurt Jarvin doesn't creep you out, then Nick Land will do the job. But he's this guy who was he was one of the forerunners at the CCRU, which is the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit. And the other co-founder of this was Sadie Plant, who is this like cyberpunk feminist. And Nick Land's got some really strange ideas. He's definitely inspired by the occult. He's a fan of Lovecraft and Julius Evola, and he talks about things like hyperstition, where we're going to take these fictional ideas and manifest them into reality. He talks about technoplastic beings, his concept of GovCorp, which then Curtis Yarvin extended to be SovCorp. And so we've got them on what I see as like they're operating through the right-hand path. It's very paternal. It's very patriarchal in terms of the archetype. Very kind of autocratic, disciplinarian. And then we've got through the left-hand path this divine mother worship, Gaia worshiping. It's all about the sustainable development goals, and a lot of them are disciples directly of Barbara Marx Hubbard. So they talk about inhabiting the noosphere. Because Barbara Marx Hubbard was an intellectual disciple of Teilhard de Chardin. And there's actually a technology called NoMap. They've now rebranded. They call it the S7 Foundation, because they have to keep changing their names. We find this all the time. They always change the name. Even Jordan Hall, right? He was Richard Jordan Greenhall, and he's now and then he went to Jordan Greenhall, and now he's just Jordan Hall. I guess that's for people, I don't know. But they're involved. He's a co-founder of Qualia Life, which used to be Neurohacker. So you see, they just keep rebranding. But that whole, they were actually talking about NoMap was the technology, holochain technology, and they actually talk about inhabiting the noosphere. So they rebranded, and actually one of the co-founders of it, her name is Andrea, but she goes by Tan. I don't know why, but it always cracks me up. Her name is Tan. So we're seeing this on that one hand side, this Game B, which, advocates very decentralized, and it's much more soft power, kind of more Fabian style social ethic, kind of social engineering, where they're going to, goad you into this moral, universal grammar, to use the UN type of language, but ultimately what they're advocating for is the same thing. It ends up in technocracy. There's a scientific socialism. It's same old thing, just different name. And of course, Game B, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a new operating system for civilization. And they call it an omni-win. It's anti-rivalrous. They say Game A, which is what we're in, is doomed for, implosion. It's going to collapse upon itself because it's too competitive. It's too rivalrous. And So now we have to move, and it's too extractive and exploitative. So essentially, it's just a rebrand of this whole age of Aquarius versus the age of Pisces, right? Pisces is focused on the individual, and it's too competitive. And we now need to move into the age of Aquarius, where it's all collaborative. And, another one of their buzzwords is sense making, which is basically consensus making. And they talk about collective intelligence, which is the noosphere. So I'm seeing these two, and it looks like, a real dialectical movement, because I think a lot of people are waking up to the Dark Enlightenment, and they're going, oh my gosh, this is, tyrannical, this is autocratic, this is it definitely requires a phoenixing of the Republic in order to achieve it, which is the Phoenix conspiracy. And so I think people are seeing that, and there's a lot of pushback that they're not supporting it, but that's opens up the window for just this perfect opportunity to move into the much softer, nurturing divine mother archetype of game B. And then we've got Peter Thiel, who's kind of like this overarching, and I painted him as like the grandmaster architect. Do I think he's the top of the pyramid? I'm sure he's not. He's only a billionaire after all. It's probably more money than I'll ever see in my life, but billionaires don't run the show as far as I know. I'm pretty sure the trillionaires and those above them are the ones pulling the string. But from what we can see, from the the lay of the land, the boots on the ground, what we can see, Peter Thiel does seem to be the top of this level of what's tangible to us. I have some speculation about Peter Thiel on the steering committee of Bilderberg. I have some speculation. I mean, he does have some like Opus Dei ties. He obviously has military industrial complex ties, with Palantir and In-Q-Tel. So I think there's some other there's other strings pulling on him that we can speculate about. But what we know is he's certainly involved in all of these defense contracts. He's got Palantir, and he's really kind of the bridge between these two, this Dark Enlightenment. And then we've got one other component that I talk about in here, which is, I call them the Theobros. And, of course, we had the Thiel Fellowship, which the Augustus Dorico was a part of. And he's known as the Rainmaker. And he pretty much admitted that he was involved in cloud seeding that led to these Texas floods. You can read between the lines, but that's basically what he said in that clip, that video clip where they interviewed him. But either way, we definitely know that he was involved in that technology, and that was right before it happened. And we know that he was backed by Thiel through this, this Thiel Fellowship, it's for encouraging people to drop out of college and pursue entrepreneurial ventures. So he's one of them, and he's part of this American dynamism movement. And so these Theobros, I think what they offer is, I'm blanking on that guy's name, but he had this concept of the three-legged stool, where you have the politics, you had the politics, you had the spiritual and economics. And technocracy never had the spiritual or the political, pegs of the stool. They, rejected politics. They weren't interested at all. This was really just a reaction to the Great Depression, right? A way they could take over the world. But the way it was couched is this is an economic solution for abundance, quote unquote. In response to the Great Depression, of course, we're going to have these energy credits, and everybody's going to live in this great abundance. And they also rejected religion. They had no interest. They thought it was just hogwash. They didn't really deal with it at all. And now what we're seeing is you have this political movement. We've got the Trump administration embracing a lot of these tech bros, the technocrats, and being inspired by people like Curtis Yarvin, Peter Thiel, and Nick Land, through the Dark Enlightenment neo-reactionary philosophy. And then you've got this Theobro Christian nationalist movement, which offers the divine mandate, right? It gives the impression that this is sacrosanct, and it justifies what they're doing. But these people, they're not just Christian nationalism as a term is a little deceptive, because a lot of people will say, well, I'm Christian and I support my nation. And, that's not what we're talking about here. Although there is a difference between patriotism and nationalism, I would argue. I think there's a nuance and very important distinction between the two. But nonetheless, a lot of people hear the term and they're like, what's wrong with me being a Christian and supporting America? And that's not what I'm saying. These people overtly say they want to subvert the Constitution and replace it with biblical law. They're talking about theocracy. So they are really talking about something that is antithetical to America. It is in direct juxtaposition to the First Amendment, the very First Amendment. And but it offers this spiritual component. It is great vehicle to operate through the Trump administration, which is the quote unquote MAGA right wing, supposedly, conservatives or populists. And a lot of them are more traditional, right? So, you're going to get the appeal of people who are conservative minded, more traditional minded, maybe more religious and Christian. But what they do is they use Christianese. That's what I call it. It's no different to me than Russell Brand talking about how he's going to proselytize people in his whitey tighties and preach Christ consciousness, which is not Christian at all. It's Christ consciousness is straight out of Blavatsky and Bailey and the Theosophical text. So, but it sounds to people who are not steeped in their Bible and they're Christian, they like the sound of this vernacular. It's very enticing. And so when you put these all together, I think you have kind of this recipe for, I called it the Phoenix conspiracy, because I was seeing this kind of theme over and over again. And one of the things they keep talking about is democracy. And I know that, one of the ways I learned about Game B was through Brett Weinstein, because he did that, speech for the Rescue the Republic, which is very interesting, because I was digging into his history with the United Independence Movement. I'll get to that in a second, because they're doing an actual Operation Phoenix, would you know it? They're calling it Operation Phoenix. And it's a whole movement with the United Independence movement. Christopher Live, who's tied to Brock Pierce, has been very involved in helping to organize a lot of these United Independent events, like the one in Denver in 2024. But they talk about this movement to flood Congress in 2026 with quote unquote independence. It's a very technocratic movement. I'll get to that in just a second. But when I was doing some research on that, Brett Weinstein was the keynote speaker at 7:00 on, I think it was April 5th of 2023. And you can find, I have links in my article, but you have to go to the Wayback Machine to find it. And this is rumor, it's hearsay, but he was a keynote speaker. That part you can find on the website. It's at 7:00. He's speaking, Brett Weinstein. And but the rumor is that the name of the speech was self-governance and the phoenixing of the republic, which I don't know if it's true, but if it is, it would make sense that he beta tested it a year earlier, and then 2024. I know some people.
So this self-governance and the phoenixing of the republic. When was this delivered? At
the United Independence. In my article where I have that picture of the phoenix, and they talk about the Independence rising above the ashes. So let me see if I can find this. It's a little bit further down when I talk about the modern phoenixing movements. I'm sure he can find it. But in that picture, so it's on the Wayback Machine, and I have a link to it, but there was an event. Yeah, it says independence rising above the ashes of failing system. Tired of watching the same old political divisions tear our country apart? Have you grown weary of manipulative partisan talking points and political posturing? Do you want our nation to come together with better solutions beyond endless cycles of corruption and conflict? What if a new era of unity and independence is upon us, and you have the power to help shape it? And then underneath it, it says uniting independence, a revolution in politics. For too long, the enormous population of the U.S. independence has been fractured and fragmented, incapable of rising above the domination of the two-party system until now. The Independent National Convention is a convergence of independent leaders from across America, joining forces to bring about better solutions and a new kind of synergistic politics. This is Barbara Marx Hubbard's synergistic democracy. That's what that is. Christopher Life is a disciple of Barbara Marx Hubbard. One that is not based on party lines or ideological divisions, but on shared commitment to work together to drive critical developments in every sector of society, with over 50% of Americans declaring independence from the major two parties. It's time for us to come together and set a new trajectory for our nation. So I have been seeing this in the, quote unquote, indie sphere. I call it the indie sphere. And for those who aren't familiar with that reference, it's a holdover from my film days. You used to have the distribution model is so different today that a lot of people can't relate to this, but you had the big studio productions that were like $100 million, $200 films. And then you had truly independent films, which is like, maybe student films or somebody cobbling together some equipment and getting their friends in their garage and making a project, right? But then you had something called indie. And the indie films were, for a SAG indie film, like SAG indie budget is like 1 to, I think, like 50 million. I don't know what it is today, but back then that's what it was. And, I don't know about you, but I don't have $1 million or $20 million in my back pocket to do a vanity project. And so what I noticed, and most people don't. And so what would happen is these artists would get together and they would find backing. And oftentimes they'd be funded as a propaganda outlet. And I'm not saying that these artists always knew that. But the person who's injecting $20 million or even $1 million is a lot of money for most people. If they're doing that, they did it because they were trying to support this message, and often it became a vehicle for propaganda. And so I kind of noticed this in the indie sphere of the media. A lot of people who seem independent aren't actually all that independent when you look a little deeper. And I saw from a lot of these, outfits, they kept talking about the two-party illusion, the two-party duopoly. And I'm not saying there's not a problem with the two-party system. Even, George Washington warned us against the two-party system. That, there's clearly, it's a loophole for foreign entanglements, domestic foreign agents to infiltrate, certainly Hegelian dialectics up the wazoo, and we see that played out constantly. But what these people are doing is preying on that because they know that people are fed up and people are frustrated. They feel like they're watching wrestling matches and they're like, hey, we got the solution for you. What's the solution? It's third wave politics. And third wave politics is straight out of Fabian society. And this is what I was seeing happening. And it is, Anthony Giddens wrote the book on third wave politics, and he's a Fabian socialist. And he talks about how we have to concentrate the radical center. And when people hear the radical center, they think, oh, great, we finally have like a moderate movement, not this crazy extreme of the left and the right. And these people are just nuts. And I found my people. And but that's not what's going on. He explicitly says the radical center is always left of center, and that it has to be. And he explicitly says this in his book, and I have the quote of it in my Third Wave Politics. It's Technological Age of Aquarius, Third Wave Dream, or just Digital Dystopia. And I have that quote in there. And I talk about a lot of these movements, these independent movements that are kind of converging, and they're using the third wave politics. Now we have Elon Musk, who's talking about, the coat of arms is the sheep of code. The coat of arms is the wolf in sheep's clothing. I think this is a nod to the Hegelian dialectic. You can see it so explicitly as a wolf in sheep's clothing. Of course, their mascot is the tortoise, right? This is the slow, incremental, kind of gradualism where they slowly penetrate and infiltrate over time. And then they use the Hegelian dialectics to churn towards their omega point, the agenda. And I was seeing this happen with all of these independent movements. And now we've got Elon Musk talking about his American Party. And who's supporting the American Party? Right out of the gate, Andrew Yang comes forward, right? Because it's not left or right. His tagline is not left, it's not right, it's forward. He's a total technocrat. And now Elon is consulting with Curtis Yarvin on this American Party right before we've got Christopher Life, who is doing his, Operation Phoenix, which is to flood Congress in 2026 with all of these quote unquote independents. But it is a technocratic movement using third wave politics to usher us into this technocracy. And I see this overlap because, again, so you've got Thiel kind of at the top of all of these various different movements, and he's got his hands on all of them, really. The third synthesis between the Game B and the Dark Enlightenment, I would say, is the network states. The network states idea was inspired by Peter Thiel with his seasteading. He put $1.7 million into this concept of seasteading, and it was very reminiscent of Terramar. It's this idea that you would have city-states on international waters, so they're outside the confines of nation state laws. And he said that he put $1.7 million into it. It didn't really go over very well. It didn't take off. But Balaji Srinivasan was very inspired by it. And he actually has a chapter in his book dedicated to seasteading. And I put the quote in my article where he talks about how seasteading is not done. We just need to get the network states off the ground. And then we can crowdfund for yachts and cruise ships, where that can be their own little city states. And nation states, he explicitly says the whole concept of, network states, the whole concept he explicitly says is the dissolution of nation states, geographical nation states. So we're going to dissolve these geographical nation states in favor of ideological cyber network states. And you have this in each, what is a SovCorp, which is what Curtis Yarvin talks about. What is a GovCorp, which is Nick Land's vision of a city-state. Then we've got Game B, which talks about civiums. And I did an article, I called it the Path to Mass Surveillance. And I outlined all these different types of smart cities. They have so many different names for them. We've got the 15-minute city. We've got the C40, which is your UN, Gaia worshipping, we'll get rid of all the greenhouse gas emissions, and we'll connect them all throughout the world. It's part of the AI World Society vision, by the way, the C40 city. And they say Ukraine is going to be the central hub for this AI World Society for all of these various nodes. The main node, central hub, is going to be Ukraine. They've done several symposiums where they talk about how we have to rebuild Ukraine. Sound familiar? We got to tear down, build back better. And they explicitly say that it's been devastated by the war. Now we have to funnel all this money into it and rebuild it. So that's the C40 cities. C40 Mayors Summit. And then you've got freedom cities. This is Trump's freedom cities. Who doesn't want to live in a freedom city? That sounds incredible. I want to be free. Let me live in a freedom city. So it's very clever marketing for, those who might be more libertarian or freedom-minded or Trump supporters, but it's not different. It's the same thing. And then, of course, in Game B, you've got what's called the Civium Project. And this is catering to people who are done with the cities. We're going to move out of the cities. We're going to get out onto the land, which, I think that sounds like a great idea for a lot of people. But it's still connected through the cloud. It's still the same smart city. You're probably going to need a digital ID to enter. So it's the same concept, and they just have different names for it, different branding. And this network state concept is kind of pervasive throughout all of it. And Peter Thiel does seem to have his hands on each facet of all of these different movements. So whether
I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I was, a bit surprised that it seems that Peter Thiel had or Elon Musk had consulted with Curtis Yarvin.
Yep.
Right before setting up this third party, and out of the wake of this it seems artificial schism over accusing Donald Trump one day of being on the Epstein files. And so he forecast that's why Trump is suppressing the Epstein files, and made a big hullabaloo about that before they parted ways and sparred, shared jabs, and then announced all of a sudden he's going to create his new party, which obviously has also a certain inflamed anti-Semitic overtone as well, since a lot of the Trump base is also getting pretty disgusted by the pandering to Benjamin Netanyahu, who's committed already a lot of genocide in the Gaza and is just acting like an insane person everywhere you look. That's what happens, I guess, when you have a suicide cult masquerading as a nation, like with nuclear warheads and a Samson doctrine, threatening to destroy everybody if they don't do what you want. So you got all of a sudden a lot of disenfranchisement, and it seems like a capture is being made. And it seems like Curtis Yarvin also had a big role to play in setting the net so to speak, for
Well,
that new project there too.
He did. So his whole philosophy of rage, which is retire all government employees, inspired Doge. So a lot of people were very excited about, oh my gosh, we're firing all this, we're getting rid of all this bloated bureaucracy, which, by the way, I support. I mean, I'm not in favor of bloated bureaucracy. And I'm certainly not in favor of, spending endless taxpayer dollars on things that don't need to be spent. But what people didn't really see was that and it's not like it's just hidden in plain sight, right? Like he said he's going to replace it with AI, but people seem to ignore that part, and they're just like, yay, he's exposing all this corruption, which, by the way, I'm glad he did. I'm not opposed to that, but I am opposed to this philosophy of retire all government employees and replace it with machines. That I don't support. And that came straight out of Curtis Yarvin's rage philosophy. But even Curtis Yarvin, I did put this in my article, that even Curtis Yarvin was like, I don't think they did a good job with this. It was like, he likened it to like a bunch of chimpanzees playing Wagner. And then he says that, it was kind of like the incel being mad when he asked the girl out for a date and she doesn't, go out with him or something, doesn't sleep with him, something like that. So he kind of made a whole mockery of like how aggressive they were. And he didn't think that they handled it well at all. But it was very much inspired. So Elon Musk is clearly influenced by Curtis Yarvin, and then now went to Curtis Yarvin his ideas are so conducive to the technocratic agenda, right? I mean, it's accelerationism. We are going to use technology to push capitalism until it hits, its apocalyptic state, implodes. And then we're just going to create technoplastic beings, which is what Nick Land talks about, these technoplastic beings. And we're going to install a CEO dictator. This is what Curtis Yarvin talks about. He says that we need a reboot of the government in America. And he says that part of the problem with Americans is they have to get over their fear of dictatorship so that we can install this CEO type dictator. And he talked about back in 2016, he was talking about how excited he was that Trump was going to come back I don't know if it was 2016, but it was in Trump's first term. It might have been a little bit later, like 2018, 2019. He was talking about how he was so excited because he envisioned Trump coming back and that Trump would be installed as a CEO because, he knows business and he's an entrepreneur and he's going to be the CEO and run the country and be a dictator. And this is what Nick Land is talking about. And this whole idea of dark MAGA, remember Elon wearing the hat with dark MAGA? And I think this was a nod to Curtis Yarvin when he talks about in his Gray Mirror blog. Curtis Yarvin talks about the dark elves and the higher elves. And he says that the job of the dark elves is to seduce the higher elves. And I think that the dark MAGA was a nod to seducing the MAGA elite, which would be the higher elves, right? That's their job. And here's the dark MAGA. So there's no doubt that Curtis Yarvin's a huge influence on Elon Musk. Of course, we all know that Elon Musk is a technocrat through and through. He talks about installing the technate on Mars, but I think he really wants to do it here in the United States. And then one other thing I was saying about when I was talking about the phoenixing of the Republic is that the idea of democracy, I keep talking about this, and I think what it really is that they want to target the West, but I think their first focus is to phoenix the Republic. But in order to phoenix the Republic, they're, appealing to democracy because that would be a revolution, right? That inherently would be a revolution because we are a constitutional republic. We are not a democracy. But then the next in line is to target all the Western democracies. And all these various movements talk about planetary scale. And so this is a vision for creating a planetary technocracy. So,
and I'd like to give a shout out to, we got a couple super chats. Thank you, Nuwan Walter, saying good luck with the show. And got to feed the kitty cat every time someone sends a super chat. Got to get my kitty cat super fat. So got to do that. And we got another super chat from Jamian saying, appreciate you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the super chat. Let me feed the cat one more time because that is just an awesome, look at that kitty cat.
That looks a little scary to me.
I got this cool image too of like the Fabian Society and the turtle. We had this artist draw it, but I don't have it on my computer. But I wanted to pull it up because it's so cool. But yeah.
No, let me just say one thing. You could always tell somebody who's a graphic design geek because you're like, I don't know how you're doing it, Donut, but you are racing to keep visual representation of everything that Courtenay is saying. As well as the cat. Of course, there's the cat. But I mean, I don't know how you do that where you're like trying to keep pace. And you're doing a pretty good job of this hyper speedy, turbocharged set of ideas.
We're comparing notes before we started.
Well, I'm from Las Vegas, so I'm the original ADD. So people like living in Vegas before the cell phones was like you lived in a cell phone. So now everybody's got it. But I think that's where it's stemming from. This is awesome. So the acceleration, I had a question about that that I'm a little confused, and I don't know if it's connected, but with Nick Land's book on hyper-racism, is that like, I never read it, so
I have a link in my article. It's on the Wayback Machine.
Is there a connection to, because it's when I hear the words like hyper, like it seems like accelerate. Is there a connection to accelerating, like and like an agenda, just like how they want to collapse capitalism by pushing capitalism so hard to collapse it? Is that sort of the same thing with that, or no?
Sort of. So his hyper racism concept, and I'll pull it up in a minute so that I can, verify, but going from memory, his hyper racism was this idea. He opens it up. He starts talking about how we've got the racism and we've got anti-racism. We need to move beyond that. We need to go to hyper racism, and really hyper racism is a speciesism. So he's against the human race. What he wants is positive eugenics. And we see Elon very much supporting that. He's talking about how we're essentially going to get to technoplastic being, but in the meantime, we're going to use technologies for genetic selection and create a superior race, right? That's really what he's talking about. So, but of course, this is just a trajectory till we get to these technoplastic beings, which are cyborgs.
Oh, okay. For that 2040. Okay. Very good. Very good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to show a quick image here that caught my eye because as you're going through the very famous image of the Fabian Society, it just reminded me of this other image that I think is kind of complementary to the Fabian Society. And I don't know if you guys can see that screen. Oh no, you can't see the screen yet, right? I gotta show. No, you can.
Oh no,
okay.
We can.
Okay. So as you can see from the name of that file, that's the crest of the town of Tavistock, which is the town owned by the family of the Duke of Bedford. And the Duke of Bedford is the Russell family. So at the time that this was crafted, or at the time that Tavistock was being created, and at the time also that the Fabian Society was being created, which was just a few decades earlier, a founding member and a leading figure of both was none other than Lord Bertrand Russell. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you have the wolf in sheep's clothing for the Fabian Society, and the sheep that's clearly got its skin being pulled off it as it's hanging, frequently signifying the town of Tavistock, which is the location where the Tavistock Clinic was eventually set up, I think is probably a little tongue-in-cheek, designed to complement each other as two images. Oh, I just lost the screen.
I was going to add to that. No, I absolutely agree. And so it was the 11th Duke of Bedford who was related. He's part of the Russell family. And he donated the building that became the designated building for shell shock therapy research, which was what the Tavistock Clinic, the auspices under which they opened was to do. It was in 1920 when he donated that building. So.
Oh, yeah. And even today, that's. Yeah, exactly. So, this is behind a lot of the woke transhumanist idea of just getting humanity to become a post-truth species whose entire idea of truth is defined entirely by our subjective feelings moment to moment. And I mean, from the get-go, the idea of it was always to figure out how do you map out and then deconstruct and then compartmentalize to rebuild people's psyches, utilizing shell shock victims, as you pointed out, who are great guinea pigs of people who have been through unhuman trauma. And that they found were highly suggestible, highly inclined to compartmentalize their personalities, their minds, their experience, to have suppressed memories that could then be wielded and weaponized, which is where the Phoenix operation came about. And I think it was you who brought this to my attention from even just a Wikipedia entry that it was
the Invisible College.
Brigadier General John Rawlings Rees who called the operation that he did when he was president of Tavistock, the Phoenix operation. Before it was even applied in Vietnam, it was done in Tavistock first to basically cleanse Tavistockian managers and other psychiatrists who thought they were there to help people. They wanted to just purge all of those naive idiots and only allow the inner elite to be involved, who were aware that this had the political purpose was to control society as a whole. There it is right there, right?
Yeah.
That's the Vietnam version. That's the Vietnam version.
Yeah, that's the Vietnam. So you can go to the Tavistock clinic. It's Tavistock and Portman website, and they'll outline it. So where I actually learned about this was from the Henry V. Dix book, The 50 Years of Tavistock. He's got a whole chapter on Operation Phoenix.
Right. That was
the Wikipedia was the Invisible College. That was which I was shocked to find. Right. That's also on the Tavistock website. They talk about the Invisible College.
Which is the Rosicrucian.
Yeah, and they say
reference.
It was a nod to the original Rosicrucian reference, but with the Royal Society. But yeah, that's the book. And so Operation Phoenix was right after it was in 1946. They had been given a donation from the Rockefeller Foundation. I mean, there were some others as well, but that's the well-known one. And it was a big injection, which would allow them to create the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in 1947. And so the Tavistock Clinic and the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, they work together. They're very much, like they're compatible and they work in sync with each other, but they serve very different functions. The clinic is much more focused on direct therapy, individual therapy, group therapy. The institute is much more focused on corporate, kind of grooming, I would say. I would use that word. But, the group dynamics, relations, conferences, more sociological kind of research, more broad scope type of research. Right. And so what they were doing, this was in World War II, and Wilfred Bion had been very instrumental in working with the British intelligence for the war. And he was helping them to figure out how they could select their military leaders, their intelligence leaders, military leaders, and they created something called the War Office Selection Boards. And my theory is that this is what spawned that whole mice to rascals reference. You can find that on the CIA.gov. It's a new framework, mice to rascals. And this is, they say that it came out of the OSS and during the time of war, and that they were inspired by the British military, MI6. So what they did in the Operation Phoenix was they used these War Office Selection Boards strategy for creating change agents. And they do say that in the War Office Selection Boards, they're talking about change agents. Tavistock's whole thing comes out of Kurt Lewin, right? Kurt Lewin created this concept of change agents, or labeled it at least. And so they were developing it based on his research on leaderless groups. And his research with leaderless groups is actually pretty interesting, because he had this theory that there was the working groups, which is a more healthy kind of group collaboration. And then there was the basic assumption groups. Basic assumption groups became hive minds. And these were the leaderless groups. And this was very influential on his creation of these War Office Selection Boards, where he worked with Eric Trist. And that was what they utilized to create the change agents in order to structure this Operation Phoenix to pave the way for the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. So sorry, that was a lot there. But I think you had something, Donut. And then whenever you guys are ready, I actually have a quote from the hyper racism document. It's the alternative right hyper racism.
I'd be curious to hear what Mathew Crawford has to say about this.
Yeah, let's let him see.
What do you think about all this, man?
Which part specifically?
I don't know. Pick a part. There's a lot. There's a one big spectrum there.
Right when you asked, my thought was on the title of this show. Was it Proof of Ritual? And right. And there's part of me that thinks proof of ritual is the hive mind, period. Right? When you have a bunch of people just shattering the same thing over and over again, then you have creation of normalcy. You have a positive feedback loop of an intended concept rather than a natural concept, right? And you know, it makes other people around, you know, believe that they're in this matrix reality that's being created. I think that's the ritual that goes on, and I think that that's intentional. One of the articles that I wrote early on that had nothing to do with the pandemic on rounding the earth was I called it Dunbar circles. I can't remember the name of the article for the moment, but I'll call it Dunbar hacking, which is that, yeah, sure, we have this Dunbar's number, this number of people who are in our community that we have such a social relationship with that you know, we trust on a different sort of level. We understand their movements, that, you know, their habits in such a way that we know who the psychopath is if they emerge, right? But then you know, part of the hacking of mass media is to present you with a false chief, but false, you know, specific slots. Maybe our minds don't just have, like, you know, 150 to 300 slots for friends or whatever, but some of them are evolutionarily steered toward being specific, like maybe a chief or a medicine man or a, you know, a healer or a hunter, you know, different sorts of roles. And if mass media feeds us these, then we have sort of a hive mind, an automatic hive mind, you know, that steers everybody at once in the same direction. So I think that's our proof of ritual.
And I see this today. Like, the big story today is this. I don't know if you saw this, but it was this AI guy getting caught at a Coldplay concert with some other girl that he works with who's married. But I think it's totally staged. Reading a lot about the AI, but this is how the algorithms go into the minds of the masses, because everybody's on their phone, not so much watching television, but if you look at the television, it's replaying this video over and over again, just like the phone, but it's like saying the same thing, seeing the same video, moving everybody into a direction. And I think that this video is sort of a AI test run. Like, first they're learning, everybody's knowing about this website and this business of this guy, but also AI is gathering all the information of the environments and how people will respond, especially with the deep fakes to come out. That's what this whole Time magazine, The Orb Will See You Now, is about. That you'll scan your eyeball, get an iris code, and then you'll get your digital passport to access
the world coin. It's tied to the world coin.
And we happen to have this murder trial going on right now, right? With this family, with like the dentist, and you know, being accused of poisoning his wife.
Really?
And he, like, supposedly asked his daughter to make a deep fake video of his wife asking for these poisons.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I think that this is all like a test run, because JP Morgan and like big players funded this guy's company, and with the files that are being talked about to be released, if they're deep fakes, if they're real, who knows? But I believe that there's a connection to it. I have no idea, but speaking of the occult rituals and whatnot.
Well, I don't know if you guys saw, I had written an article. It was called The Algorithmic Oracle. I've had a request to, you know, make it printable. So I'm working on formatting it. And I've realized in the process of trying to format it is 120 pages. So I get why people have asked for a printable. I didn't realize it was that long. I thought it was like an article, but yeah, it's basically a book. But that's kind of what I talk about in here. So my whole thesis in this is that you know, to predict the efficacy of technology on wartime. And that's the RAND Corporation. However, my theory is that it really came out of Kurt Lewin's sensitivity training, which is brainwashing. The National Training Labs manual says it's brainwashing. And of course, there's the CIA.gov, you know, letter that talks about how they wanted to test the CIA and test the they wanted to test the efficacy of sensitivity training, but they couldn't test the CIA with this method because it was too reminiscent of the Chinese brainwashing. They didn't say Maoist struggle sessions, but I think that's what they were alluding to. But then my thesis is that they're using a hybrid of this, because they've already merged sensitivity training with Delphi method, right? Delphi method is just a more mechanistic, systematic variation of the sensitivity training. And in person, when you go to lots of political events, board meetings, they already merged the two for the purposes of consensus making. But now the algorithms are using cybernetic feedback loops to do that. And so you have these, algorithms that are data mining people, and they're using Delphi method techniques in order to then create these struggle sessions on people, create Hegelian dialectics where people are fighting each other, because that creates heightened emotionality. And then we've got that cognitive warfare document out of NATO. Well, they did a series of them, actually. And I have some quotes and screenshots from that document in this book now. But where they talk about how they play on people's emotions, and that anger in particular is a very useful emotion for triggering people and for basically socially engineering people. So yeah,
I mean, I'm always triggered. I can't go on X without getting mad, and I'm addicted to it. Like it's like a sick thing that I like to go on X and get pissed off. But the guy in this video that's super viral, he does these things called DAGs. I don't know too much about it, but I mean, like the whole AI thing, it's just studying us. And the Delphi method, I'm going to read this, because just being like in touch with like my own emotions, in a sense, is like you can see people controlling you in real life, but also on the internet, like the algorithms, everybody's mad. If you're like a woman, you'll probably get a bunch of Tate stuff in the algorithm, or if you're a certain religion, you'll get anti that religion in it, or if you're a certain political party, like, so it's just making us mad. And that is also part of like the amygdala hijack, where when you get into this like survival type mode, you're easier to control. So you get people selling products, by fear. And then you got to buy this or you're not going to live unless you buy that, so it's I'm not going into it all.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I was just thinking a little bit about, so going back to, because there's so many topics raised, right? To pick and choose which one is most important is impossible. So I'll just pick which one, caught my attention that I was thinking about. One of the key principles in this is, as you pointed out, is this convergence of the Theobro sort of new crusader Christian nationalist movement that's been sort of captured and is corralled into a certain direction and is very convergent, if not completely overlapping, the transhumanist Silicon Valley figures who see themselves as also being part of some sort of an eschatology, or they've got an idea of a certain mission in some weird way, though they deny the idea of objective good and evil. Like they just they're Hobbesian in that sense. They believe that, or they're Nietzschean. They're of the view of Callicles that what is good, or what we call good, is that which is simply utilitarian and which benefits those who have the power to project their will onto a system. So, but both of them are unified in the fact that both believe in some teleological future new age that is slowly coming into being, and that in the one case you have like the influence of the British grand strategist, what's his name, John Nelson Darby, right, and the Darbyites who were at the heart of the rapture theology, the premillennial dispensationalism. And Darby was just a guy who's like the godson of Horatio Nelson, like a high level British admiral, head of the Navy, so this guy, John Nelson Darby, found something called the Plymouth Brethren, or the exclusive Plymouth Brethren. So he's the founder of something which openly says that it has an inner teaching order for the elect and an outward teaching for the non-elect. That's the exclusive Brethren. It's slightly different, though I think both are toxic. People like Aleister Crowley came out of this thing. And this guy comes up with a new interpretation of certain writings within the New Testament that allowed him to calculate utilizing very like numerological principles. And I don't want to say principles, but characters, that God dispenses his will, his desires to his creation in 1,000-year cycles. And so the God of 2,000 years ago is different from the God of today. And, you know, and you have these cataclysmic breaking points to usher in each new cycle is the way he chose to plant things. And, you know, at the end of the day, he had this view that we're approaching an end times, and he came up with a whole way of interpreting the book of Thessalonians that we would, when we approach that moment, have a rapture, a secret rapture, and the good Christians would just disappear. Everybody else would like burn for a period of tribulation as the Antichrist came back. And then people were like, well, what's the Antichrist? You know, so people Darby was saying, well, it's Russia. You know, it was like 1850, and that was like Britain's primary nemesis at the time. So it's like, of course, how convenient. It's Russia. That's Gog. And Gog is that's how we'll interpret that thing at that moment, you know? And he was going around also trying to organize Americans. He did 6 tours to convince as many American fundies to adopt his theology and wait out the Civil War. Like, don't fight to save the Union was one of his messages, because this is God's will. God's plan is to burn the earth, destroy America, and ultimately lead up towards this necessary battle. And he also had this view of restoring the Jews to the homeland, to the desert, as part of like fulfillment of this prophecy. And he's working with people like, you know, Lord Palmerston was really happy to work with this guy and sponsor him. Lord Shaftesbury, big time. So you had that thing. Simultaneously, I was reading a book going through how he was, once Blavatsky founded Theosophy, he began utilizing a lot of Blavatsky's language in his own sermons and writings. So there's an interesting overlap there. Now, the thing with Blavatsky is she was also calling for, as part of her theology, this future state where a new root race would emerge right out of the 5th root race. And she had this weird, completely scientifically unfounded model of how human civilization evolved, which kind of fused some aspects of Darwin, but within a broader system that presumed some ancient Hyperborean spirit race that then like planted itself from the stars onto the earth. And then you had, another root race emerge out of that, which was some pre-Lemurian race. And then you had the Lemurians, which is absurd. It's as the 3rd root race, which basically got that name because it was like this imagined continent between Australia and India. And this is how stupid it gets, because there's lemurs in Australia and there's lemurs in India. They're like, there must be a land bridge, a continent that went underwater and was submerged to allow for those lemurs to cross, and we'll call it Lemuria. So you get
to Atlantis also.
That was the 4th root race, Atlantis. Yeah. And then each root race has like 7 in her. Again, it's very, very numerological. Again, no foundation, but she's like, yeah, each root race has 7 sub-root races that each one kind of give way to the next higher up one. And then finally, as the lesser root races are being Darwinianly like weeded out by the more fit, you then have a superseding into a bifurcation point, and the new thing comes in. So out of Atlantis, you know, we're now entering we've been in the 5th root race, and then now we're on the verge. And she said the 6th root race is about to come in the next century in California.
Yes,
California is going to be the center. Oh, there it is, right there, right?
Yep.
So you got the polar race, then Hyperborean. Yeah, polar was the spirit one. Hyperborean's part spirit, part matter. Then Lemuria's matter.
Can we stop and talk ritual for a moment?
Yeah, do it, man.
Because, you know, to me, it seems obvious at this point, reading through all the history, that this was connected to the rise of the Nazi Party. That this notion, the notion of the Aryan race came from Blavatsky, and the Theosophical Society was pushed.
He had the secret doctrine on his nightstand.
Yeah, well, interesting. Well, you know,
Hitler, yeah.
The fact that the inner core of the Nazi group was like this Vril cult, right? Specifically, and weirdly, Robert Sefer is pushing like Vril ideology stuff within the Maha movement, which is it's a little disconcerting. But that future race, then people have been comparing the rise of Trump with the rise of Hitler, but in the most sort of absurd staged Hegelian, sort of ways. But the future race, okay. What's that term that's been tossed at us for a few decades now? Californication.
Oh yeah, the big Olympics, which is a huge ritual, as we saw last year. The big Olympics will be in the smart city of California to come.
Yes, that's right.
Also, Matt, I have a question, because I read a lot of your material, and especially with the technocrats and the energy credits and the Bertrand Russells, but your book on the Venetian roots of this power that's here. I think I even pulled up one of the. I got a bunch of slides. I don't know where I put it. Oh, right here. The Clash of Two Americas. Really love the intro of how you go into all the different theories that people have, and what you go into with Trump and the British Empire, and what's going on with him fighting that establishment. But with Venice, we just saw Jeff Bezos have his wedding in Venice.
Yep.
And also, what's his name? Joe Rogan. He's vacationing on his $50 million mega yacht in Venice. And I know that this is with Cynthia Chung's work right around the cult center of Capri and Malta and whatever. What's your thoughts on what's going on with Venice and those and all that?
Yeah, man. I mean, I'll try to link that up to what we're talking about. So Venice, how to approach this? Definitely is, I think, much more of an influence over world politics and especially the epistemological warfare and cultural warfare domain than people realize. Much bigger. We're told that it disappeared with Napoleon. That when Napoleon did his wars, he kind of dismantled Venice, which was sort of the seat of world empire for many centuries. It had been on the decline for a few centuries. I think its apex was around the 15th, 16th centuries. But it's not really true. And many of the, there's the Cini Foundation, other oligarchical palazzos and families, I think, are still concentrated there that have an disproportionate amount of influence. Now, as the story goes, so just for those who don't know, I'll just recap. So when Rome, the Western Roman Empire, broke up, right, there was some major maneuvering. So you had the Eastern Empire that split off right around 390 or so. The Western Roman Empire was overbloated. It melted down. You had the various waves of Alaric and the Visigoths, carrying out their looting. And finally the thing toppled. So a lot of the leading families picked up their loot before the collapse and moved to more strategic grounds outside of the danger zone. And this is where a lot of the origins of the Italian city-states came out of. So you had Amalfi, you had Venice, you had Genoa. That was sort of the three dominant city-state hubs that recreated these little mini empires that each were occupied by dominant members of the higher families, the old, what are called the patrician class. And they were, at different times vying for influence, cooperating on a lot of things. At the time, Rome itself was an area that some of the patrician families stayed back, and they began utilizing a proxy group in the form of the Merovingians. They were the pagan sorcerer kings, Celtic Isis worshippers. They were known as the sorcerer kings. I didn't give them that name, but it was only a few generations into it that you had a figure named Clovis the First, and he became nominally a Christian, but he wasn't really. He was always an Odin worshiper at heart, like Hitler. So the Merovingians became kind of like the marcher lords, the hand, kind of like the ISIS to the CIA or Israeli intelligence, like proxies to do the dirty work. And they became known as the Frankish kingdom. So they maintained that for a while, and they were told a little story as well. So Clovis, and I think maybe this went on a little bit earlier, as part of the agreement that amongst all of the warring mercenary families that are managing this carved up former Roman Empire, we're gonna, the Ostrogoths, the Goths, the Visigoths, there's so many different warlords, right? We're going to put our bet on you being successful. We're going to give our support to you, says the Roman families to the Merovingians. And as such, we have to legitimize you a little bit more. And so they created a sacred myth. And that particular sacred myth was that Jesus, the blood of Jesus flowed through their veins. How did that happen? Well, they were of the view that they basically made up a bunch of fake gospels in the 2nd century that became known as the Sethian Gospels, or the Nag Hammadi scriptures in more recent terms, but they existed way before they were sort of unveiled in 1946. And so within those, you had the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Thomas, the Mind for Perfect Thunder. Like there's a whole bunch of them. People can just Google Nag Hammadi texts. You could buy them as well. Mm-hmm. And within some of those books, it talks about how Jesus didn't really die, but he went to the south of France with Mary Magdalene, or at least Mary Magdalene went to the south of France, impregnated with his babies, which were then protected by secret societies in the form of these royal organizations, of which the Merovingians were told that they were the recipients of that blood, and that continued to be passed on over the centuries. Oh yeah, you got a lot of images going on there, but yeah, that's the location.
Sorry, yeah, I just keep it going.
Yeah. So yeah, it's Abraxas, the demon that Carl Jung was interfacing with there. So okay, so that was a bit of a useful thing. So a lot of the leading Viking clans, even after the Merovingians were ousted, still were used. The Northmen, they were still used as ISIS-like proxies to be directed to destroy the rivals of these leading higher up old bloodlines, the old patrician class, the higher families. And, at different times they would use them to go and invade Sicily, Italy. That's where you had the Norman invasion there. At different times when England was behaving uncooperatively, and you had, a certain king named Alfred. He was doing some pretty big, good reforms to educate the orphans, really bring public improvements. Well, he had to be ousted, so they had a program to invade England and break. They used their Viking Northmen called the Normans to do that invasion. That was part of that. So they were just using them like toys. But they continued to use them, and some of them were granted noble status, especially as the Crusades began. And some of the families, some of the ruling royal families of England were also told that they have the bloodline of Jesus too, the divine Sethian Luciferian blood. Because in their mind, in these Gnostic scriptures, you got to keep in mind, Jesus is the avatar of Lucifer, with secret wisdom that he imparts orally to his favorite initiates, Thomas, Mary Magdalene, the sacred prostitute being two of them, and who pass on this oral teaching that is never written down, because you can't write it down because people are too stupid to understand what the truth is. Because if they did and they read it, but their minds weren't like groomed to understand it, they would be horrified morally because it's disgusting, because you have to do some crazy shit to be allowed into the inner sanctum, Right. So all that to say, Venice, so Amalfi becomes they're dominant. They're the founders of modern mercantile capitalism from the 9th century onward. That's a city-state that has that ownership of Capri, which is where Courtenay showed me pictures from her honeymoon with Houston. And, Amalfi and Capri especially, but Capri had always been, since the age of Tiberius, a cult center. That's where the cult of Apollo, this is still like the dominant temple to Apollo, was still located. The worship of Apollo Dionysius rituals, basically orgy murder rituals, were taking place on the Isle of Capri with Tiberius. Underneath, you've got a lot of caverns, catacombs. It's that indicate, various, or it's described that there's a lot of Mithraeum. There's a number of influential Mithraeum under the Isle of Capri. There's also, anyway, it's a mystery cult center, and it was run also by the Benedictines, a sect that was created in the early 6th century when the various mystery cults were banned by Theodosius and Stilicho, his general, and basically they didn't really disappear, but they went underground and they infiltrated Christianity. And I think the dominant skin suit that they used that had a Christian appearance was the Benedictines at the time, who were given control of Capri for the next, I think, 700 years. So what you had was Amalfi sets the stage for the Crusades. You have an Amalfi merchant who gets a deal with the Caliph to be permitted to build a temple in around like 1050 or so, or 1020, which becomes the temple of the Holy Sepulchre. It's still there. It's the place, the domain where they say that the cross that Jesus died on is located apparently in there. Again, I don't believe it's true necessarily, but I think it's a myth, but that's what they say. And that's what like Pope Francis gave to King Charles when he was coronated as a king a year and a half ago. He was given like a little piece of wood from the cross of that Jesus died on, you know. He's also got a rock that he sat on to get his coronation. That's supposedly, and again, I don't believe this, but it's what they say, a stone from Solomon's temple, the temple that was destroyed a couple of times, you know, that some people want to bring back again today to usher in a reset of civilization. So that was what Amalfi was doing. Now, Amalfi's crest for their city is people would recognize it as the Cross of Malta. So the Order of Malta, which was set up by an Amalfi-based Benedictine grand strategist named Gerard of Sasso. He created the order of, it was called the Order of Hospitallers back in 1098 when he created it. That's it right there. That's the Amalfi crest. So they basically took the Amalfi city-state crest, made it the name of this, or the image of this order that became a crusader order that was vital in overseeing the first and every other crusade afterwards. They created a second order called the Templars, and this was done by a guy named Hugh de Payens, but a few others too, that created this sort of, I guess the way I see it, it seems like a right-hand, left-hand path thing where both orders are co-created by Benedictine radicals.
I see it that way too.
Yeah. And this one is a little bit more of a masculine, you know, like the way, Courtenay, you went through in your paper, the Theobros utilizing this more impose your will onto the masses, this penetrating power of more recognizably fascist sort, and the other one use more Fabian sexual energy, a more intuitive energy of engulfing your victims through emotional mass manipulation and hive mind processes, though both ultimately utilize sex and hive minds. You know, it's just that it's where you put your focus. So the Templars turn out to be Baphomet worshipping, you know, magicians that end up controlling most of the banking, and they get out of line because they're under the control, or at least that's the agreement. They're supposed to be obedient servants to an agency that is geopolitical in nature, that is located in you know, the domain of the controllers of Amalfi, of Venice, who benefit immensely from the Crusades, not just to destroy potential and existent alliances and cooperation amongst civilizations. Muslim, Christians, Jews were actually getting along in a number of key places that was beautiful, good things that had to be destroyed. But also they were making a lot of money. They were just funding all sides. And, you know, you had a similar order of assassins, a similar Gnostic order of Muslim. I think they're based on a pre-Muslim occult agency that took on a Muslim form in the 10th century, and they were called the Hashashins. They would basically get into drug-induced altered states and go and carry out, you know, assassinations. They ended up running the entire Fatimid dynasty. That was what overthrew and was a big enemy of both the Seljuks as well as the Abbasids. So the Fatimids was sort of the power projection conduit of the assassinate order. And they worked together with the Templars, including underneath Solomon's caves, Solomon's mines, which is the Templar headquarters where they were worshiping Baphomet. And it was the assassins that would collaborate with the Templars in killing each other's enemies to ensure that these forever wars would just continue onward and onward to no end. So I'm just saying all of this just to get across that at a certain point, they seemed to get out of line. They kind of wanted to, it kind of gave me the sense of like Hitler a little bit. Like, you know, they controlled a huge amount of influence, financial, military, and other, and the sea lanes also, the skull and crossbones that we know of actually emerged. It was a Templar symbol.
The Cilician pirates of the Pirates of the Caribbean, like it's banking and
Yeah, exactly. And they were utilizing like a Mithraic, you know, warrior, mercenary, knight template to carry out their thing. So there's a lot of this weird stuff that I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. There's my books for that stuff. But all that to say, they started basically I think getting the idea in their mind that they could manage the world and they didn't have to be peons for anybody else. And when they started, this is kind of like Hitler basically telling his London and Wall Street sponsors that, hey, you know what? I got all of this power. You help me do it. But instead of me being junior partner, how about I be the senior partner and you work with me and we'll co-manage the world together? And some, Anglo-American fascists were like, yeah, I guess so. And then other ones were like, no. So yeah, you had a bit of a fight over like, what do we do? And they chose to abort the Frankenstein and live to fight another day. And so I got the sense that they did something similar with the Templars. And I'm, coming out of this, Venice became the dominant controller of much of the Templar shipping lanes, their banking operations. Venice became the center of global bullion trade, banking. Again, you could just see it. So Amalfi kind of lost some of its influence. Venice gained it. And they came into power fully when they organized in the Fourth Crusade to get a bunch of idiot crusaders. It was like 1201, managed by the Templars and the Hospitallers, to go to the Holy Land. But instead of going to the Holy Land, they didn't do that. They got them into massive debt. They basically sent them to Constantinople, which was Christian, and basically told them to go loot and destroy Constantinople, which they did, paid off their debts. And they were like, well, we're carrying so much gold now, we're not going to go to the Holy Land. We'll just go back home. And so Venice got like 38% interest on their loans. They got tons of cash. They made out like a bandit, but they also destroyed their rival, which was Constantinople. And now there's no more Constantinople as a power. And they took control of Constantinople's shipping lanes and maritime trade routes, including trade routes into Asia, where, so Venice then became the unchallenged global power, and they remain so for the next several hundred years. So I'm just saying all of this because you brought it up.
Dr. Joseph Farrell brought up something in one of his podcasts that just stuck with me, that what's going on in Argentina and where they're trying to uncover these rat lines, that has nothing to do with the rat lines with the Vatican and the National Socialist. It has more to do with the Templar treasure, maybe with the relationship with Taiwan and the Templars or something.
Yeah. I think it's a decoy. I think that narrative is put out there to keep people's minds off of the trail. The Templar, like for many centuries, there's been the allure of this mythical Templar treasure. In my assessment, the Templar treasure either was already found centuries ago, or it doesn't really exist, and all of it was already given over to the Knights Hospitaller, which became the Knights of Malta later on. They were rebranded. And I think that at the end of the day, there, some people say, there's the Hollywood movies have been used by the CIA, by these occult intelligence agencies to promote such things like the Da Vinci Code, or even in Indiana Jones. You got the storylines being popularized for a mass audience that involved the Nazis searching for the treasure of the Templars in Solomon's mines, looking for the Ark, looking for the Grail that would give you immortality and all of this stuff. Even Kali cults, which is, by the way, the Temple of Doom, the Kali Ma, traumatizing for kids. That shit's real.
And before all that, the Courtenay was the Pulp Fiction character that got turned into movies, and the famous one was was it just called King Solomon's Mines or Solomon's Mines?
Solomon's Mines, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they did that, right? They infused that into the pop culture. So that people's idea of reality and fantasy got really blurry, and it became difficult for people to think about this stuff in a rational way.
I think they literally want them to be a little bit swapped, so that reality seems like fantasy and fantasy seems like reality to a degree.
Yeah, I think you're right. Oh yeah, that's a remake with Patrick Swayze? What?
Yeah. I saw that they had remade that.
Oh no.
The Weinstein one that you talked about like 4 or 5 months ago on the Templars, maybe longer, on Badlands. It was another story where they took out an hour of it. Like, what were they going to show? And that with the Merovingians, and I haven't read his work, but I've been looking into the name Sinclair, and Gary Wayne goes into the Merovingian connection with the Sinclair family, and I just find it interesting. Speaking of movies and Hollywood, I'm seeing nothing but like Sinclair, where you got the dinosaur Sinclair, or the new show Wednesday, which I'm a fan of. The main stars named Sinclair, and there's this brand new TV show about the Sinclairs as well. I don't know if you ever heard of this family, but they're married into the Rothschilds, which means they're married into the whole exclusive capitalism guardian class, you know.
Yeah, well, the Sinclair family, or St. Clair or whatever, yeah, they were definitely selected. That they, again, the way I approach this is that the oligarchy creates myths for multiple levels of control, right? So they myths for the masses, myths for the upper, like lower management, myths for the upper management, myths for themselves. And I'm quite persuaded that they end up believing their own myths. At the end of the day, I don't think anybody's necessarily like logically, rationally in control. That's my hypothesis of the machinery. I think it's kind of taken on a crazy life of its own. I think I'm quite certain that's solid. But I'm open to being challenged. I can't know though. How do I know?
I think the Tesla bots are the Templar order because they look just like the Templars, the Tesla bots. Sort of. I think so. Yeah, here I'll bring up two images, like how they're next to each other. But also, I look at symbols. So this would be a Tesla bot, right? It's the black and white, you know. And then if I bring up a Templar one, I'm trying to. Let me see.
Okay. Well, what I'll say one thing here is that the Dolly the sheep, the big cloning movement.
Right.
That sheep was manufactured at the Roslin Institute in the UK. And the Roslin Institute was given its name for the Roslin Chapel, which is the Rosy Chapel and featured in Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. Which for people to keep in mind, right, if how all of this stuff we're talking about applies to what we're dealing with in our current world on a number of levels. In Dan Brown's story, which is kind of it's lifted a lot of that content from the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which itself was put out there in like 1982 by two guys, one of whom was not a grandmaster, but he was a member of the Freemasonic Quatuor Coronati Lodge. That's Michael Bagnon, who is an author of that first one. And the Quatuor Coronati is the King Edward VII, Charles Warren, Walter Besant run Freemasonic Research Lodge, set up in like the 1870s in order to chart out the Palestine and carry out biblical. That was the founding movement of biblical archaeology. Was that? So they were the ones who were like obsessed first with like scoping out Solomon's mines, doing the excavation, looking for the Ark of the Covenant, blah, 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 blah. And so Walter Besant was the treasurer of that lodge, 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s. This guy was the brother-in-law of Annie Besant, who is selected to replace Madame Blavatsky, right? And it's freaking a lot of people out because they're like, what? This woman's an atheist, materialist, Fabian, reformer, and all of a sudden she's like a prophetess getting channels from higher entities and like is gonna become the new leader of the Theosophical Society at the same time. What? So she herself seems to be like a bit of a psyopt witch. To what degree she was aware of it, I don't know. I would say she was probably a bit of both, like psyopt, managed, broken, but also a participant in the joke, because she did so many things. Like she ended up running the India Congress Party, right? She helped co-found with Blavatsky and another theosophist in India, Home, something Home, Octavian Home.
Yeah, she did so many things. She founded so many institutions and groups that it had to be almost like reading from a script with an army of people filing papers behind her.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's unbelievable. She knows that there's a machinery that is using her and as a front to get certain policies into play, but she loves it. And maybe to some degree, if you're so mystical, you might be really actually kind of blind to the fact that you're a cardboard cutout. If you really do think that you are, that there are spirit entities and demons that prefer you, and that you have to create these shows for the masses who are too stupid to understand the truth. There's a whole weird set of logical backflips and contortions that somebody can get into to become a conduit.
I'm going to go with no, because even before she was involved in the Theosophical Society, I think that what she was doing with Irish into
the Free Irish movement or whatever, the home rule movement, right?
Home rule movement. Yeah, I think that was already psyop work. I think that she already knew that she was performing, sort of occult intelligence activities.
Right.
And she was just so good at it that they had to, use her talents elsewhere.
I think you're right. So,
and then between her and Gandhi, they trained the first 6 prime ministers of India, right? Like that's so much, that's so deep into the independence of India. They didn't trust a lot of people to do it, and she had to be very, very good at that work, meaning it was very deliberate.
Yeah, she trained Gandhi in how to interpret the Bhagavad Gita when he was a student in London. It was through these theosophical study groups that he learned how to interpret his own religion. And if you look at Tavistock today, the town of Tavistock, and the Tavistock Clinic itself has a statue, only one statue right in the middle of the Tavistock Clinic, and that's a statue of Gandhi.
Yep.
Which is also interesting, and anyway, we could speculate on that. But all I have to say, that's what these guys. So Besant, Benyon, who wrote
just FYI, Gandhi was inducted into Freemasonry and obviously Theosophy. But just to add that.
Speaking of which, in Tavistock Square, you've got the headquarters of the British Medical Association. And do you know who built that building?
No.
The Theosophical Society.
Of course they did. Really? Is that so?
They were building the building. Supposedly, they handed it or sold it to the British Medical Association because they couldn't finish financing it. But of course, this is the same Theosophical Society that would just wave a wand and have 22 offices pop up for Women's League in 1 year all over India. Every time they wanted to do something, the money was it was there.
Yeah,
but they couldn't afford that building.
Did that say Aldrich? One of those pictures. Aldrich something?
Aldrich Blake?
Yeah, Louis Aldrich Blake, huh?
Okay. Might be Nelson Aldrich, might be a member or a member of the family.
Yeah. That's where I went to. I don't know.
Yeah, could be, I wonder.
I do too.
Definitely, yeah. Have you guys looked at all into the association of Bulwer-Lytton and the Theosophists as far as Bulwer-Lytton's I'm thinking of Robert Lytton, Bulwer's son, who was the head of India. He was what do you call it? The person who's in charge of Governor General or something, Viscount? I don't know. Viceroy. The Viceroy, that's it. He was the Viceroy of India, overseeing the big 1878 to 1880 famines that killed 20 million Indians, and he was the one who was overseeing that mass murder. But he was also the one who oversaw the time that Blavatsky was going to India to try to find a new headquarters that wasn't New York. That's him there on the left, upper left. Is that Lord? Yeah, that's Lord Lytton. That's the son of Bulwer-Lytton. Bulwer-Lytton is that guy who's got his hand on his chin with that guy. That's his father. He's the founder of modern Rosicrucianism, a close friend of Eliphas Levi, Alphonse Constant,
and Benjamin Disraeli.
And lifelong friend, childhood friend of Benjamin Disraeli as well. So he's the guy who sort of reorganized the Rosicrucians in the 1860s. That I think was at the heart of the creation of both the Theosophical Society, that sort of gave spiritualism more of a rigor to it, because the spiritualist movement, which is it went viral in a weird way, but it wasn't very rigorous, and it was full of immature fraudsters. So they needed to tighten it up and reform it, which is where the Theosophical Society came in. And I think he oversaw it, and they were co-created pretty much with a lot of the leading black magicians who became the founders of the Golden Dawn, the Hermetic Order, the Golden Dawn. And so when his son, he dies, but he's the minister of the colonies. He dies at a certain point, I think 1868 or something, and then his son becomes the viceroy of India, and is like a genocidalist. I think he's carrying out like sacred murder, like it's an occult ritual murder in the mind of these freaks. But he's the guy who's there when Blavatsky and Alcott are going to India to try to find their location to set up their Adyar headquarters. And there's no evidence. Like it's so erased of like collaboration between Lytton and these theosophical leaders, but I'm sure it's there. Like,
well,
I'm sure it's there.
I think that it's a member of their family, Mary Lutyens, who married Jiddu Krishnamurti.
Oh
shit! No
right.
way.
Yeah.
Really? That's the granddaughter of Bulwer Lytton, right?
Yes. I mean, I know that Mary did marry Jiddu. That was his wife, right? And I feel certain that was like an arranged introduction, right? This is, of course, after the kidnapping and rape of Jiddu Krishnamurti, and Jiddu Krishnamurti's father going to London and fighting in court to get his sons back.
Whoa.
Right after they kidnapped him, and they were trying, I think trying their, trauma-based mind control to get him to be their Messiah. I think that Mary was sort of chosen as somebody who would then, hold his hand through life and steer him away from, maybe going ballistic at the Theosophical Society.
What was her name? Her name was Mary Lutyens, eh?
Lutyens. I don't know.
And that was actually his wife?
Yeah, because they say, I mean, not that Wikipedia is the authority on anything, but it says married to.
Oh my God, she was the daughter of Robert Bulwer Lytton, and she married Krishnamurti? That is wild. That's amazing.
Yeah, I've had that on my graph for a while. I think I sent you an email that pointed out like a different piece of this, which was that there was some other marriage within the Bulwer Lytton family between people in the Theosophical Society, and I had these connections mapped out, and it didn't occur to me for a long time. That because that was because I didn't know about the rape of Krishnamurti. I didn't know to be thinking that way about that relationship, right? But I think that's probably what it was, to steer him away from telling the world, "Wow, these are crazy, horrible people. You got to hear what happened to me," right?
Yeah.
They were lucky that Krishnamurti was actually, he's presented as being this profound spiritualist, but he was actually a dunce. Right, the other school kids would constantly make fun of him because he couldn't do much of anything.
Yeah,
because all he did was get training in being like a spiritual,
guru,
sayer of words. All through his childhood and life, and so I think that he couldn't ever process what had happened to him, and that Mary was put in charge of keeping the veil over. Keeping him going, well, maybe Annie Besant wasn't that bad,
Well, people say
it says it's Edith Penelope Mary Lutyens, and that she was the biographer for him. It doesn't say she was married to him, but it does say that it was his biographer. So that would make sense that she's the architect of his narrative if she's the biographer.
Well, the biographer is one thing. I know that he got, and maybe I'm confusing something. Maybe there are two people. I know that he did get married, and I have her next to him in one of my graphs. And actually, I'll ask ChatGPT real quick who his wife was.
Yeah, because in Wikipedia it says it's Ragapol something. I'll go back and find it. It says married Raja Gopal in 1927. And resided in the house known as Arya Vihara.
Okay, good. Thank you for the correction.
But it's still very useful, because as his official biographer, it's making the point that she was really close with him for many years. Like they're putting, so she would have likely have been kind of like a handler positioned to,
And I think that there was some other
manager of his narrative, right? So. Yeah, sorry.
As well,
I think that there was some other reason too that I thought Rosalind was also like a handler, like meant to, that she was chosen for the role. But I'll have to go back and read through the notes that I took.
Mm.
And Matthew, because we're coming up on some top of the hours, I wanted to go into a little bit of the monarch butterfly if you've got time. I don't have that symbol anywhere. I thought this was an interesting symbol. This is the Tomorrowland Festival. It's got the...
Oh, Tomorrowland is tied to Game B.
Really?
How so?
I have to look it up right now to remember who it was who's connected. But I've watched their videos, and they do all of their language is Game B. Let me see. Tomorrowland to find out who.
This is their flag. It's like a...
That's crazy.
Iron Cross and the Illuminati Eye.
Yeah.
And also everybody that's on my channel, because we're streaming all over the place, please go subscribe to Matt, Ehret, Mathew, Courtenay. I got all their links down below. This would be a good time to do that as well.
Well, let me ask you, what do you guys think? Because I got my hypothesis, but it's not something I fully understand, is why the symbol of the butterfly for the monarch mind control operation. So what do you guys think about the symbol of the butterfly?
Well, I think it had to do with monarch programming and the notion of it being intergenerational. So
the hereditary aspect of the monarchy idea.
Yeah. So the idea that it was this metamorphosis that is carried throughout, right? So the intergenerational trauma sets them up for easy programmability. That's the theory.
And these butterflies are known to have multiple generations while completing one migration.
Yeah.
Right. Like the ones that nest or in Mexico. They come all the way from Canada, but it's not the same butterfly. It's children of children of children of children of the butterfly that left Canada.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point too. Yeah. Right. Then you have also the larva idea too, right? The transmogrification of one species kind of into another species. So you got an idea of breaking down something that used to be into something new that's created out of a cocoon. So there might be that was the way I was thinking about it. But what you guys are contributing to that concept is really high value. That makes a lot of sense.
I wish I could add on to it. I read something about it and I totally forgot. But I like what Mathew was saying, how you guys did an awesome breakdown. It was very like, whoa, y'all can check that out.
The Rothschild family is involved in an enormous amount of biowarfare work. And that's something that people should zoom in on and look a little more closely and organize the thoughts even better than I've come up with a few, which is, this Charles Rothschild, who was the entomologist of the family, who had the collection of tens of millions of butterflies, right? And whose daughter, Miriam, went to Bletchley Park and worked on biowarfare involving thinking about insects, by the way, during World War II. Right. And by the way, a member of the Rothschild family is one of the pioneers of mRNA technology.
Is that which one is that?
I think the last name's Lane.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's Charles Lane. Forgive me on this one.
It's fine. Yeah.
I'd have to open up my notes and graphs and find it somewhere. But I don't even think I've put it in my notes yet. I think it's like one of my 700 tabs that are open.
No, it's fine. I've written it down as a future recall. It's good. It works. Go ahead.
But yeah, I think that they were always thinking both in terms of steering humans, and I think that's what Pannonica was doing, moving to New York and getting involved in the jazz movement and the control, and specifically also sort of like playing a part in Hegelian racial dialogue, right? One of the most unfortunate things about the United States was, being born with the problem of slavery involved, right? And then it's easy to find people who will participate in culture war. It's even easier than going into Indonesia and finding, one prince to slay the other one, right? But a lot of the American jazz American musicians, black musicians, have these interesting ties to the British Empire. And I'm trying to remember who it was. What's the guy's name? Nat King Cole, who toured the world with the British Navy, right? That's a little bit specific, right?
Yeah.
But of course, Panatica, was right there with all these different jazz greats, having them die in her hotel room even, and
Right.
but I think that the butterfly tattoos and the monarch symbolism, Dolly Parton, all the who very openly admitted to having secret relationships with like apparently powerful men who weren't her husband. Not even secret, like she, and she had this friend who seemed to be her handler. And I think that her husband just sort of like looks on face like her handler. He like right after they met, he spent 2 years in the army and then came out and they got married. I just don't even believe her backstory. The 13 kids in the one room cabin or whatever it is. I think that she's a conjured image, but I think that that's true of a huge portion of the entertainment industry, and so many of them have those tattoos, and they say, and when asked about the symbolism, they're like, oh, it means rebirth and blah blah blah, but it's just known how often a lot of these entertainers are pimped out before they ever get to become big time stars.
Yeah, and I look at the celebrities all the time, and Miley Cyrus and Dolly Parton both work together, and she's got the butterflies all over her symbolism as well, and even the that movie Smile too, with the butterfly at the end of it. But like I was showing that video that's like going super viral at this Coldplay concert. Coldplay was big part of this whole 2030 emissions, the green carbon stuff, which seems like it would be connected to the energy credits when I think about energy. And but they were doing this thing called Global Citizen. So when everyone had to go to their rooms and stay home, Coldplay, Sesame Street were on the television with all the different actors. Very strange. And I think there's a connection to even like this Elmo hack that just took place.
Yeah.
I think there's a connection to some United Nations stuff, like but I'm paranoid.
I just wanted to clarify. I don't know if it's the same Tomorrowland because I looked it up with that logo. But there was Tomorrowland conferences, and they were the whole thing was centered around like transmedia storytelling, which is a concept in Game B, where they talk about like what was it? I think Jake Ruiz was who was in that. It was like one of those dialogos for Game B where he talks about how he's going to Trojan horse the concepts of Game B into his Disney project. But Tomorrowland works on like those kinds of concepts, and they had conferences. I don't know if it's the same Tomorrowland as what you were referencing.
It probably was the big EDM festival, and there was just like this big fire. Their symbol is like a Masonic compass a couple years ago. But yeah, so here's like some of the images I had pulled up of Sesame Street. With
the Sustainable Development Goals.
The what?
The circle of the Sustainable Development Goals is,
yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, so this was like the globe. It was something I was covering heavily like 5 years ago. And this Coldplay, is that their name? Yeah, I forget their name, but I think that there's something more to it.
Very possibly. I mean, they usually use the entertainment as for operational preparation of the environment. So all the like transhuman like predictive programming in movies right now is insane. I just saw Megan 2, and I right. I won't ruin the ending for people, but I mean the language they use, it's straight out of D&D. Like straight. I was just like, whoa.
Megan 2.0.
What?
Megan 2.0. I
Megan
can't wait to
2.0.
watch it. I'm a big fan of the first one.
Were you? It's funny. Like it's got a very like. I used to love Buffy. I know it's like total feminist propaganda, but I always thought it was the role made for me, and they should have recruited me, even though I didn't audition. But it's got that kind of humor. Like it's a very snarky kind of witty humor. So,
well, I've been doing a deep dive on the show The Office, and so I've been doing all this history of Scranton, Pennsylvania, and just it goes into just so much history in Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. And this book I read called Haunted Scranton went into the Masonic ghost. So there's just like another lore of the Masonic ghost. But in the show The Office, they always show this big tower. And that tower was built by this guy named Dixon, I believe. And the Masonic temple where these ghosts are like haunting in Scranton is his home. It was his home. They demolished it and built the Masonic temple. So it's like just a kind of a fun kind of thing. But yeah.
Yeah. No, it's all over the culture, eh? Like you really, I was also, see, I do these recaps, either movie recaps or they do these for like 12 or 20 minutes. You can get on YouTube just if you want to get the gist of like what a movie is about, but you don't want to like put yourself through the whole thing.
Right.
And I was going through like the seasons of American Horror Story as well, which is like into season 13, and they're very sophisticated storylines involving a lot of elements that I know is true regarding like the actuality of serious satanic witch covens in the United States. Like one whole season was built around that. And it makes all different allusions to various controlling networks that were part of the Anglo, the American aristocracy that's protecting. Anyway, you got like a lot of stuff and messaging that is coming out more loudly. Like it was already there 30 years ago and 40 years ago. You already had it. Like you had the Witches of Eastwick with, Jack Nicholson and Cher and whoever else, Susan Sarandon, like normalizing witchery. But it was still kind of like off. You still had normal movies, and you go back further in time, and you had, you had occultism in a lot of things. Oh yeah, there it is. It's a great, very, very interesting bit of predictive programming and just cognitive massaging.
Yeah, is it predictive programming, or is it taking the real and making it look silly?
It's both.
The silly is being made to look real.
I think it's both. Like they're sort of creating an environment in the collective imagination in which later things like Practical Magic, the movie with I forget their names, Sandra Bullock and what's her name, Tom Cruise's ex, are like witches. But there's like so much more than you have The Craft, and then it just like accelerates. Now from 2015 onward, it's just nothing is normal anymore. Everything has a cult, esoteric underpinnings in every show you watch, every movie that's out there, every cartoon that you see. It's like
rammed down your throat.
Yeah, even like was it Wicked? Cynthia and I just sat back and we watched Wicked. It's not a badly done movie.
I liked it. The musical, right?
Yeah, it was actually yeah, she acted pretty well. She was kind of self-deprecating and fun. But that
like that.
Yeah, she did well. She did well, even though she's like she seems to be a Project Monarch mind control victim. She did well. Yeah. But even within that, like they have like a grimoire, right? That's like when they get to the Emerald City, there's a grimoire that only the green girl can read because of whatever mutation she went through because her mom had sex with some guy who like drugged her, and so she can read it and has thus mystical powers where everyone else can only fake it. And like, if you look at even there, like Frank Baum, it's not like this is the first time where you have people in high positions of cultural influence who are occult, like doing this stuff, because Frank Baum, who came up with the Wizard of Oz, he's become like sort of like a hero amongst a lot of libertarians because they say, he was and maybe there's an element of truth that he had like a messaging that the yellow brick road was all about gold, and he's criticizing the Federal Reserve that was coming online soon.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, Frank Baum was also a theosophist. Like he was calling for the mass genocide and extermination of all the natives that he saw as being inferior root races that had to be by necessity exterminated by the superior Teutonic Aryan breed that he saw himself as being responsible for. And he was really loud and active about that too. Like he's a hard genocidal fascist. So that's probably coloring his stories as well, right?
The bomb stuff is really, really interesting. And just so that you guys know that you probably don't even realize this, but I wrote like 3 or 4 articles on the Wizard of Oz back in 2022, and it was the wrong interpretation. It was right when I was really, really delving into and discovering what Theosophy was. And finding out that Frank Baum was a Theosophist, and I had bought the interpretation that it was a story of monetary economics, right? Which is it's a shame, because it's one of those things where I had read the book and seen the movie at such a young age that when I was discussing the theory that it was a discussion of monetary policy was so many years later. That then, as I began to reread each chapter, because I was going chapter by chapter and writing about it, I stopped and I was like, whoa, this is actually really, really weird. But I feel like that the actual story is about how I think that the witches who are supposed to be the good witches are the bad witches. They work at being beautiful as a form of mind control. And that the witches who are bad are not necessarily, the East and the West, which they're not necessarily like good as in like highest moral beings or anything like that. What they are the ones who are driven to isolation by the good witches. And then the good witches have Dorothy do their dirty work and dispense of their rivals.
The Wicked movie is sort of, I feel like, sort of like that, but I'm not that deep into I've never read it really, so, but it seems like they flipped the script on that movie in a sense. Something else I saw, which is sort of a cult that I wanted to bring up.
Well, before you do, I just want to tell you that I know people who have been like MK Ultra, and they always talk about how they use the Wizard of Oz in their programming. Like a lot of them will have yellow brick roads leading up to their house. They mind control them with the Wizard of Oz. So
really,
yeah. I know firsthand people who were MK Ultra who talk about that. So,
And before we wrap it up, I'll end it here. I just wanted to bring up one thing on the since we're talking about the occult and all that. I just found out that the first baseball field was called the Elysian Fields, and I believe that Matt, you kind of talked about a lot of this stuff. It kind of reminded me of Eleusinian, even though it's not different place, but Elysian. But that was the secret society in the show House of Cards. The House of Cards secret society was the Elysian Bohemian Grove secret society. So I thought that was kind of probably a cult.
Well, you also have that's interesting. You also have the show called Da Vinci's Demons on Prime Video. I'm just watching it now. It's not great. Like none of these things are great, but I'm watching it just because it's a secret society of Mithra that is recruiting Da Vinci into their inner sanctum in a battle with the other more satanic agencies that are running the Vatican. But the whole thing is like it's a Mithraic. They got the Mithraic symbolism all over the place, and that's the subtext managing this story of what Da Vinci is. And it's again garbage. Da Vinci himself was a beautiful soul, a really incredible mind, but they're recasting it in this kind of the same way that Dan Brown recast things too. And the fact that Dan Brown, I mean, if you look at his stories, just to like tie it to something said earlier and what Courtenay had done in her Phoenix Conspiracy, the fact that you have these Opus Dei creatures who are all over Peter Thiel, like that's he was groomed by one of the leading Opus Dei members when he was at Stanford.
Paul
Yeah.
Arndt, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. And you have a number of these beings around MAGA and, installing different Supreme Court justices. Like I'm thinking of Leonard Leo. Here.
Yep.
Opus Dei is everywhere, but they're also featured in the Dan Brown novel as the bad guys who are maintaining the story of the literal myth of the Bible is what they're doing. Is like their job is to maintain the myth of Jesus as divine in order to keep society under the control of the Vatican as sort of the warriors of the Vatican, and they're evil. But they're doing like self mutilation. They've got like metal spikes around their legs. Now the reality is they actually do that. That's actually what Opus Dei members actually have to do to be a higher member. And there's videos on this. They talk about it. It's crazy that there's this aspect of it. But they were just seated in the 1920s, right? And they're by this guy who becomes the personal guru of Franco. Half of Franco's government are members of Opus Dei. They run one of the biggest banks of Europe for a long period. They're hugely influential in Washington, D.C., and they play in Dan Brown's story the bad guys to the this sort of Templar Rosicrucian Priory of Zion thing, which is maintaining the holy bloodline. And they all meet up in Roslyn Castle in the basement, right? Which is where the story hits kind of the Tom Hanks character that the St. Clair family has been sort of maintaining. Or been protected by this agency. Blah 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 blah. And again, it's just very, very present in the configuration of what you're laying out as far as the feminine, like right hand or left hand path. Is it the left hand path?
I think they're on both. I think they're on both because
they kind of are, right?
Kind of are. So you have the Peter Thiel, who's kind of the bridge, right? I call him the master architect. I know there are people above him. I'm not saying there aren't. What we can see at that managerial level, right? And then you've got what I was talking about, the United Independents with Christopher Life. Christopher Life worked with Brock Pierce to do the convention in Denver in 2024. And Brock Pierce is tied to Bannon. Bannon is definitely tied to Opus Dei, right? So, but I think you also have the Opus Dei. Sorry,
go. Keep going, and then I'm going to say something.
I also think you have it. So that's kind of the right-hand path, right? Bannon very much working with those Theobros on through the right-hand path. But then I think you do have the this kind of Peter Thiel ancillary left-hand path working. I'm trying to think of some of the other connections that would be more tangible. But yeah, I think it's both.
Yeah, well, you definitely have, because I think the problem here is that the right-hand path was historically applied by the Jesuits.
Yeah.
From their creation from 1534 up until the 20th century, that was their job, was infiltrate everybody. For other cultures, you're highly fluid, highly flexible, highly rigorous, very creative, willing to die and be tortured. So again, these meditations really take you through a certain cognitive discipline, which is astounding, but also bounded by a blind obedience to the hierarchy. So again, very useful for command and control of mind slaves. But for the Christian world, their job was to infiltrate and keep control of the Christian world, especially the Catholic world, and make it as rigid as humanly possible in order to, on the one hand, project power, but on the other hand, to create a sick environment of toxicity and spiritual suffocation that would be conducive for the emergence of Luciferian rebels who would then be captured, kind of like we saw Aleister Crowley emerge out of the Plymouth Brethren, this ultra strict Orthodox Brethren cult. It caused the kids to feel so much shame for thinking about, doing something bad. Every kid thinks about doing something bad, but the thought was akin to it was identical to the sin of having done it. If you thought it, you did it, and if you did it, means you're burning in hell. And so that type of stifling environment created a lot of Satanists, right? They're like, well, that's not the God I believe in, so they would go in the opposite direction, and that's what the Jesuits largely did with their very strict, overbearing education system. We saw this with a lot of the baby boomers who just embraced this Dionysian frenzy of Luciferianism in the 1960s. A lot of them they suffered, especially in Ireland and Quebec and Catholic-run places in France. They suffered under a very disciplinarian tyranny in the Catholic churches run by Jesuits. So we could see how that they would play off of each other as sort of but the problem was the Jesuits by the 20th century, they went modernist. So they followed, they ended up largely following the Pierre Taillard de Chardin reset.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they ended up adopting all of a sudden this feminine mystique as part of their modus operandi.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is what gave rise to transhumanism. This is the manifestation of Blavatsky's sixth root race, kind of
this is also game B.
Yeah, AI cult out of that. Yeah, it's game B. That's exactly it. And so you can see how they then needed a vacuum because the right-hand path still had to be satisfied. So it seems like it was that point that they seeded Opus Dei by Escriva in the 1920s to serve what they were no longer doing. But it seems like they're just sort of two sides of the exact same thing.
The right path is Hegelian, so it churns, right? The dialectical churn, like that's how the spiral goes towards the omega point.
And it seems that it keeps happening with this reaction. So the reaction, problem, reaction, and then you get these different reactions with where they're the Bolsheviks, but then here you go, here's Adolf, kind of. So it's sort of the same play. I appreciate all y'all being here so much. Already at the 2-hour mark. I mean, I could ask y'all all questions all day long because I read all the material, the Substacks. Make sure to go subscribe to everybody down below. You will love it. Absolutely great. Mathew, where can people find you and what to look out for?
Matthew.
Matthew.
Sorry.
One piece, two cheese.
Yeah.
I'm Mathew, and that's Matthew.
My middle name's Mathew. So.
All right. Do you have a Matthew in your middle name, Courtney? Or are you the only non-Matthew?
No, I am out of the Mathew crew.
Oh, that's awkward. Awkward. Oh boy.
But my name is spelled with one T because it was a family last name. So we're just it's all just rearranged. But I'll go first. I'm at Rounding the Earth, and I just want to thanks for inviting me. I always enjoyed these conversations because when I talk to a group like this, things that I've read and things that I've put together, as metadata or with specifics, wind up connecting with what other people have figured out and read, and you guys are those people who I can make connections with as we go through the data, right? But yeah, I write Rounding the Earth. I haven't written an article in maybe 7 months, but I plan to go back again because I've just always been a writer and always enjoyed the way that it helps me think through everything that I'm interested in.
Cool.
Nice. Courtenay, what can we look out for? Where can people find you?
You can find me at CourtenayTurner.com. So my name is Courtenay, but it is spelled like Courtenay. So that's CourtenayTurner.com. And that's where you can find all of my podcasts and all the ways to connect with me and support me. I also have my Substack where you can find all of these articles that I was referencing, that some of them are books, and I will be making them into book form. I have 3 books in the works. And yes, so we will be one I'm co-authoring. That will probably be out pretty soon because we need to get that out before midterm because of what's going on with all of this phoenixing, the republics and the West and planetary scale of transhumanism, technocracy. So I have that. I will be working on finishing the Hegel book, but I do have the preview of that on my Substack. And then this algorithmic oracle I will be making into book format so people can have that in a tangible physical copy, because I recognize that 120 pages is a lot to go through on screen. At least that's what I'm being told. So I will have that available. But you can find my Courtenay Turner Substack spelled the same way, like Courtenay Turner. And you can find all of my articles and this piece that I was talking about, Phoenix Conspiracy, on there as well. So thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. I always love these, and I always love all the different paths that they go down, and I feel like it sparks all sorts of intellectual stimulation. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, like I said, it's fun to interact because I watch y'all show like every day because y'all be posting every single day. So very and it's always different topics and very deep. So yeah, thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Matt Ehret.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, thank you, Donut, for hosting this, and yeah, this is a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this. Like you guys were saying, it's just sometimes just having the internal dialogue in the head. I mean, it's wonderful. What a blessing. But then at the same time, being able to like throw ideas out there, share, receive, have your thoughts change according to what other people who are also potent thinkers are also looking at. It's really invaluable, and we don't do this enough. So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody who tuned in for the live stream and watched the recording. Really cool. What I could say is, yeah, go to risingtidefoundation.net is one of my websites that I run with Cynthia, my wife, and we do like weekly lectures that people can tune into just by getting a subscription to our Substacks. Or our Substacks are good too. We do things almost every day. MathewEhret.substack.com, and also CanadianPatriot.org is the last place where people could buy our books and watch our movies and things like that. It's all up there. So yeah, but again, this is a blast. Good for the soul. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, everybody. Smash that like button. Thank you for your support. Much love, and God bless you.
Yeah,